Ted Mosby is the villain of How I Met Your Mother. I know exactly how that sounds. The whole show is literally built around his voice, his chair, his story. He is the narrator, the protagonist, the romantic hero the writers spent 9 seasons asking you to root for. And most people did. Most people still do. But that framing, that careful, charming, self-pitying framing is exactly the trick. Because once you stop watching How I Met Your Mother through Ted's eyes and start watching what Ted actually does to the people around him, you see something the show never once says out loud. The boy who got his heart broken learned to break other people with it, slowly, quietly, with a smile on his face and a story ready for every occasion. That is not a hero. That is the victim who became the villain. Not because Ted is cruel, not because he wakes up every morning planning to hurt someone, but because when you spend your entire life building an identity around a wound, when you turn your pain into a personality, eventually that wound stops being something that happened to you and starts being something you do to other people. And the saddest part? Ted never noticed the moment that happened. Hey, pull up a seat. Because I want to walk through this whole thing with you from the beginning, and it is going to completely change how you read every single scene. So today, we're actually going to learn something too. Chapter 1. The Wound. Let's start with where everything starts with Ted, the thing the fandom almost never talks about because the show buries it in a quick line and moves on. The fact, Ted's parents got divorced when he was a child. That is the quiet foundation underneath all 9 seasons. And I want to be careful here. Divorce alone doesn't make someone into what Ted becomes. But there is a specific thing that happens to certain kids in certain divorces, and Ted shows every single sign of it. He became a fairy tale believer, not in a soft, romantic way, in a consuming identity level, this is the only thing keeping me together way. The right person, the right moment, the right grand gesture, the story that finally makes sense of everything. Psychologists call this a love schema, a script a child builds about what love is supposed to look like. And here is the part that matters. For children from broken homes, that script doesn't become looser over time. It becomes more rigid, more desperate. Because the fairy tale isn't just about romance, it's a promise. If the story ends right, it means the broken thing was worth it. The summary, 2 slow sentences. Ted didn't just want to fall in love. He wanted the story that would make his whole childhood make sense. He wanted proof that the pain had a point. And that is a weight no real person can carry for him. That is where the problem starts. Chapter 2. The Woman He Wouldn't Hear. Now let's talk about Robin. Because this is the relationship that the entire fandom has judged for years, and I think almost everyone has read it completely backwards. The standard verdict is that Robin failed Ted. She strung him along, she was emotionally unavailable, she couldn't commit. And the show absolutely builds you toward that conclusion, because the framing is Ted's, the narration is Ted's, and Ted Mosby is one of the most unreliable narrators in television history in ways the show never once acknowledges. Here is what actually happened. From the very first episode, Robin was honest. She told Ted clearly she didn't want to get married, she didn't want kids, she couldn't promise to stay in New York. She put every single card on the table, early, plainly, without apology. Because she understood that pretending to be someone you're not just to keep someone close is its own kind of cruelty. She respected him enough to tell him the truth. And Ted spent years deciding her truth was a starting position in a negotiation rather than a final answer. There is a psychology term for what Ted does in this relationship: projection. He took his own narrative, the woman who will eventually choose love over ambition, who will arrive at the version of herself that wants what he wants, and he layered it over a real person who never once signed up for that role. And the pattern is, every time Robin behaved like herself instead of like the character in Ted's story, Ted framed it as Robin failing him. And here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. In any other context, we know what this is. A person who is told clearly and repeatedly that someone is not available for what they want, who continues to pursue anyway, who treats the other person's honesty as an obstacle to be overcome? We do not usually put that person in the center of a love story and call them the hero. But Ted Mosby gets that treatment every single time. Chapter 3. The Weapon He Didn't Know He Was Carrying. Now let me get to the part that almost nobody calls out, because this, in my opinion, is the clearest evidence that the victim has become the villain. Ted weaponizes his pain, not consciously. That is the critical detail. He doesn't know he is doing it. But once you see the pattern, it shows up in almost every significant relationship he has across 9 seasons. Here is how it works. Ted gets hurt, genuinely. The heartbreaks, the near misses, the rejection, all of it is real, and the pain from it is real. But instead of moving through that pain, he converts it into moral currency. His suffering becomes the reason he deserves what he wants. His romantic history becomes the unspoken argument for why everyone in his life should accommodate his needs without question. Look at Marshall and Lily. They spend years structuring their lives around Ted's romantic crises. They cancel plans. They talk him through the same spiral over and over. They absorb the emotional weight of a man who never actually moves forward. And the show frames all of this as friendship, as loyalty, as what good friends do. But watch Marshall in those scenes carefully. Watch the tiredness behind the patience. That is not just a good friend being supportive. That is a person who has quietly learned that Ted's pain always gets the room. And saying anything about it would make you the bad guy, because Ted is the one who is hurting. And then, the finale. The most damning exhibit in the whole case. Ted sits his children down to tell them the story of how he met their mother. 9 years, every detail, every near miss and heartbreak and grand gesture. And somewhere in that 9-year story, the woman he clearly cannot stop thinking about, the one the whole narrative keeps orbiting back to, is not their mother. It's Robin. Their mother is dead, Tracy, the woman he actually found, actually loved, actually built a life with. She is barely cold. And Ted uses the story of how he met her, ostensibly a tribute to her memory, to build a quiet 9-year case for why his children should give him permission to go back to the woman he was never really over. His own teenage daughter sees it in 30 seconds. She says, "Dad, this isn't really about Mom, is it?" She's right. It took the audience 9 seasons to catch what a teenager spotted immediately. Chapter 4. The story he kept telling himself. Here is the psychology term I want you to take away from this video. Self-serving narrative construction. It is what happens when a person processes their own life story in a way that consistently positions themselves as the deserving victim and positions everyone else as the person who saved them or the person who caused their pain. Ted Mosby is a textbook case. Look at how he remembers every relationship. Robin. Robin strung him along. That is Ted's version. The actual version, Robin told him the truth the first night they met, and Ted decided not to believe her. Stella. Stella left him at the altar for another man. That's Ted's version. The actual version, Stella had never fully resolved her feelings for her daughter's father, and Ted proposed after a timeline that didn't give them either enough history. Zoe. Zoe was the wrong woman at the wrong time. That's Ted's version. The actual version, Ted pursued an unavailable woman, ignored every sign of incompatibility for months, and filed the failure under bad luck. In every single case, every one, Ted's version places Ted at the center of something that was done to him, not something he co-created, not something he could have navigated differently. Done to him. That is not just insecurity. That is a worldview. And a worldview like that doesn't just affect Ted. It reshapes everyone inside his orbit because it turns every person in his life into a character in a story that was already written before they arrived. There is one moment in How I Met Your Mother that I think is the most accidentally honest thing the show ever put on screen about Ted Mosby. It is not in the finale. It is early on, a throwaway scene, when Lily tells him more or less, "Ted, not everything is a sign. Sometimes things just happen." And Ted cannot sit with that, not even for a moment. The reason? Because for Ted, the entire structure of his life depends on everything being a sign, on the universe having a plan, on his pain being the setup for something, on the story making sense in the end. Because if it doesn't, if his parents just divorced and it didn't mean anything, if he just fell for the wrong people and it wasn't the universe preparing him, then what was all of it for? That is the real wound, and it is genuinely heartbreaking. I mean that. But here is what happens to a wound you refuse to address. It doesn't heal. It becomes a lens. And every person you meet, every relationship you enter, every moment of connection or loss gets filtered through a story that was written long before they showed up. A story in which you are always the one who deserves to be loved, and anyone who can't give you what you need is a supporting character who failed their role. That is what Ted did to Robin, to Stella, to Zoe, to Victoria, to all of them. And then he did it to Tracy. He found her, the right person. He genuinely loved her. I believe that completely. And then she died. And instead of letting that grief be what it was, the loss of someone he actually loved, he folded it into the next chapter of the story, the one where he goes back to Robin after all, the one where everything, including Tracy's death, was just the universe setting things up correctly. The victim who became the villain, not because he stopped hurting, but because he never once let the hurting change him. If you've spent 9 seasons rooting for Ted Mosby, I understand. I was right there with you the whole time. The show is engineered to make you root for him. His voice is warm, his pain is real, his love for Marshall and Lily is genuine, and the hope he carries is sometimes genuinely beautiful. But here is what you see when you watch it differently. Every person in Ted's life gave him years of time, patience, and emotional labor. And Ted received all of it as his due, because his story was important, because his wound was real, because he was the one who deserved to find love. The wound was real, his pain was real, the hope was real. But real pain does not excuse what you do with it. And what Ted Mosby did with his was spend 9 years telling a story that was always really about himself, to his own children, in a room that still had their mother's ghost in it. That is the most honest thing How I Met Your Mother ever showed us about Ted Mosby, and I don't think it meant to. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one.